He didn't even look up from his phone when he fired me. "Yeah, Sienna. We're moving in a new direction," Garrett Reese said, lazily scrolling through emails as if dismissing the woman who rebuilt half the company was nothing more than clearing a calendar alert. I blinked, my hands clenched in my lap. "Excuse me?" Garrett finally looked up and smiled, one of those condescending corporate smirks that said I already won. "Your role's being dissolved. HR will walk you through the transition. You'll get your severance and a glowing letter. But yeah, today's your last day." I stared at him. 3 years ago, Westbridge Tech Solutions was weeks away from shutting down. Payroll bounced. Clients dropped. Systems crashed. Everyone ran. Everyone except me. I stayed. I restructured the ops team. I worked 16-hour days. I rebuilt the back-end infrastructure and saved the damn company. And now this slick, overpriced CEO, who had been here for 5 months, was firing me like I was part of the furniture. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw every number and project I'd fixed in his face. Instead, I said, "Got it." And I stood up. He looked surprised. "That's it?" "You're the boss," I said quietly. What he didn't know was that I wasn't walking out, broken. I was walking out holding 10% of the company he thought he controlled. I walked past HR, who handed me a folder with my exit paperwork. I didn't open it. I nodded, said thank you, and walked straight to the elevator. The doors closed, and I smiled, because 5 years ago, when the company was dying and desperate, I made a deal with the founders. I gave them a loan when no bank would. In exchange, I asked for shares. Private. No spotlight. Just 10%. They agreed. No one outside the original group knew. I didn't want the attention. I wanted the leverage. And now? Garrett Reese had just fired one of the company's owners. I went home, sat at my kitchen table, and pulled out the original contract. The ink had faded slightly, but the meaning was still clear. Ms. Sienna Blake shall maintain a 10% ownership stake in Westbridge Tech Solutions, including board meeting access, voting rights, and strategic oversight authority, effective immediately. They'd forgotten who kept the lights on. They'd forgotten who saved them. But I hadn't forgotten what I owned. The next day, Garrett's face was all over LinkedIn. Corporate buzzwords, a new podcast episode, a photo from some leadership summit, where he spoke about streamlining talent. He thought he was in control. He thought firing me was a flex. He didn't know that I still had access to our internal finance drives, because I designed the architecture myself. He didn't know I still had contacts with vendors who owed me favors. He didn't know I still had dinner once a month with Layla, the co-founder who quietly stepped back after her cancer diagnosis. And most importantly, he didn't know that. The next board meeting was in 10 days. He didn't put me on the guest list, but I didn't need an invite. I was showing up with something better. A seat. Let him have his new direction. I'd see him at the table. And when I walked into that boardroom, I'd make sure the smirk disappeared from his face, permanently. There's a strange kind of calm that comes with being underestimated. After Garrett fired me, he never once looked over his shoulder. He never checked whether I had access to shared folders, admin passwords, vendor portals. He assumed I'd disappear. Probably thought I'd cry into a bottle of wine and move to another city. But I didn't move. I stayed still. Quiet. Strategic. Calculating. And most importantly, I started digging. First, I reread the entire equity agreement I'd signed 5 years ago. It was airtight. I had 10% ownership and full board participation rights. The shares were private, registered under an entity I created after the buy-in, which meant even HR couldn't trace it to me without legal discovery. He had no idea. I spent 2 days doing recon, starting with the new merger Garrett had announced. Just weeks before, Nova Trace Analytics. He was pushing it hard, calling it a game-changing move into artificial intelligence and behavioral modeling. Investors were intrigued. Staff, skeptical. But no one knew what NovaTrace actually did. I found out quickly, NovaTrace wasn't a research lab. It was a data mining outfit with a history of unauthorized scraping, gray market surveillance, and flagged ethics violations in 2 states. They'd been blacklisted by a handful of privacy watchdogs. Their CEO, Ashton Vale, was known for buying silence. So why was Garrett pushing this so hard? I followed the money. Using the finance tools I had built into Westbridge's internal system, a legacy admin function no one had removed, I pulled 2 encrypted reports buried in an innocuous archive. Inside were unusual payment transfers. Vendor. Name, NovaTrace LLC, consultancy support, $95,000 every 3 weeks, disguised as development alignment expenses. There was more. A payment trail linked to a dummy account that connected to Garrett's cousin's marketing firm. That firm had 0 digital presence until 6 weeks ago, just in time for NovaTrace's consulting to begin. It was fraud. Thinly veiled and arrogant. Garrett wasn't just fast-tracking a bad merger, he was getting kickbacks, and I had the receipts. But exposing him wasn't enough. I needed the right moment, the right place, somewhere public, undeniable, and impossible, for him to spin. The boardroom. I had 8 days before the next board meeting. Enough time to prepare, but not a second to waste. I reached out to Layla Kingston, one of the original founders. She had stepped back for health reasons, but still held influence behind the scenes. She always said I reminded her of herself, sharp, grounded, underestimated. When she picked up the phone, I didn't start with small talk. I still have my 10%, I said. And Garrett's hiding something serious. She went quiet. Then, come over. We met in her greenhouse. She looked thinner, but her eyes still burned with clarity. You knew this would happen eventually, she said, handing me tea. Guys like him, loud, fast, reckless. They always implode. You're just the spark. I laid everything out. Financials, data leaks, connections to NovaTrace, the offshore laundering. When I finished, she said, do it. Reclaim your seat. Make it public. I smiled. I will. Then I asked the question that had been burning. Since I left, why didn't you tell anyone I was an owner? She looked me dead in the eye. Because you didn't need a crown to know you were a queen. And because real power reveals itself when the wolves forget you're in the room. That night, I returned home with new purpose. I began building the presentation, clean, bulletproof, unassailable. I annotated every document, created a timeline of Garrett's misconduct, prepared hard copies in case the tech failed. Then I sent a quiet message to the board secretary. This is Sienna Blake. I'll be attending the upcoming board meeting under Clause 5.7, Permanent Equity Holder Rights. Please confirm seat placement and materials distribution. The reply came an hour later. Confirmed. Welcome back, Ms. Blake. Garrett had no idea what was coming. The building looked different. Not physically. Same steel and glass facade. Same polished lobby floors, but different. Colder, glossier. Like someone had tried to bleach out every ounce of character and history. Like Garrett had scrubbed Westbridge Tech clean of its grit and made it into a showroom instead of a company. I walked through the revolving door in a fitted charcoal blazer, my bag slung neatly over one shoulder. Nobody stopped me. No one from. Reception recognized me. The girl at the front desk glanced up, nodded at my badge. Board observer, internal stakeholder, and pointed toward the elevators. She had no idea who I was. Perfect. The top floor was quiet. Too quiet. The boardroom sat at the end of a long hallway with frosted glass walls. Through the blur, I could make out silhouettes. 7 figures seated around the mahogany table, silver carafes of coffee already poured. I paused. My hand hovered. Near the door handle. This was the moment. I had been erased, humiliated, discarded. But now I would speak. And when I did, no one would look at Garrett the same again. I stepped in. The conversation stopped instantly. All eyes turned to me, including his. Garrett sat at the head of the table, laughing at something seconds earlier. The moment he saw me, his expression faltered, flickered, then cracked into confusion. "Sienna?" he said, blinking. "Are you lost?" I gave a small, precise smile. "Not at all." I walked to my seat, third from the end, across from Layla, whose faint grin betrayed her delight, and opened my leather folder. I pulled out a bound copy of my presentation and slid it across the table to the board secretary. The chair of the board, a graying man named Philip Hawthorne, looked from me to Garrett and then to the folder. "Ms. Blake is here under Shareholder Clause 5.7, Layla said smoothly. "As a 10% equity holder, she's entitled to attend all strategic board sessions." Garrett's mouth dropped open. "What?" he said. That can't be right." I turned my gaze on him, steady and unshaken. "You fired me, Garrett, but you never read the books closely, did you? You would have seen the equity documents. I've been a silent partner since 2018. His face went pale. The other board members began flipping through the folder I'd distributed. Charts, invoices, payment trails, everything clean, organized, irrefutable. Philip cleared his throat. "Mr. Reese, were you aware of Ms. Blake's stake in the company?" Of course not. This is clearly..." He stopped. He realized he had no leg to stand on, and I wasn't done. "I have evidence that Garrett Reese engaged in unauthorized financial transfers," I said calmly, "including off-the-record consultancy payments to NovaTrace Analytics, which is not only under FTC observation but also failed a privacy audit last year. Additionally, I've uncovered transfers to a shell marketing firm owned by Garrett's cousin, used to funnel money back into his personal assets prior to the NovaTrace merger vote." Dead silence. I let the words settle. Garrett was sweating. "Now, I'll remind the board," I continued, "that NovaTrace is currently under scrutiny for illegal biometric data mining. Aligning with them puts our shareholders, our clients, and our company's reputation at risk." Garrett stood, his voice rising. "This is a setup. She's bitter because she was let go for underperformance. Your only metric for underperformance," I cut in, "was who couldn't be manipulated." Philip tapped his pen against the table. "We'll review the evidence thoroughly. Ms. Blake, please continue." I opened the digital file and displayed the first chart on the room's overhead. Monitor, a cash flow map. The highlighted paths showed the movement of $1.4 million in consulting fees, and red arrows linked them to a Cayman-based firm under Garrett's cousin's name. Then I played a voice recording, Garrett's, from a captured call I had, archived through back-end security, because I'd installed the system myself. "We'll push it through. If anyone asks, say it's R&D support. Nobody reads those reports anyway." He went white. "You recorded me. You forgot I built your security system." He lunged for the table, but Layla leaned forward and said flatly, "You're done." Philip turned to the board. "Motion to suspend Mr. Reese pending further review?" 6 hands went up. Garrett looked around, betrayed. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "You'll regret this." "No," I said softly. "But you will." Security entered 5 minutes later. Garrett didn't resist. Not loudly, anyway. Just a string of curses, empty threats, and the stomp of defeated shoes across marble. When he was gone, the boardroom exhaled. No celebration. No applause. Just respect. Heavy, quiet, earned. Philip stood and turned to me. "Ms. Blake, I'd like to formally invite you to remain as an acting advisor for our internal audit committee." I shook my head. "I don't need a seat. I already have a voice." He smiled. "Then thank you for saving this company." I gathered my materials and nodded at the group, and as I left the boardroom, I didn't feel vindictive. I felt free. Garrett was gone, but his damage was not. The boardroom may have voted him out, but I knew better than to assume the game was over. Men like Garrett Reese don't disappear. They regroup. They weaponize what's left. And just 2 days after his termination, the counterattack began. It started quietly. A leak surfaced on an anonymous blog, one that specialized in tech leadership gossip. The article painted me as a disgruntled former manager with deep insecurities, and implied that I'd staged a smear campaign against Garrett after being fired. It included carefully cropped images, cherry-picked Slack screenshots, and even vague references to emotional instability and past breakdowns. All lies, but cunning ones, and they spread fast. Within 24 hours, the post was picked up by 2 small tech podcasts, then 1 medium-sized outlet. Then someone tagged me in a viral Twitter thread. The Queen of Quiet might have played Dirtier Than You Think. I sat in Maya's living room as she read the post aloud, her face tightening with every line. "They're spinning it," she said, "trying to drag you down before the audit report clears your name fully." I nodded. It's Garrett, or someone loyal to him. That night, I received a DM on a hidden Proton Mail account I hadn't used in years. Subject, "You forgot the shadows still work for me." Attached was a photo of me from 3 years ago, leaving a therapist's office. I stared at the image for a long time. They weren't just going after my credibility. They were trying to ruin me. But what they didn't know was I kept everything. 2 years ago, I'd helped install a disaster recovery mirror across Westbridge's back-end servers. One copy lived on site. The other, encrypted and hidden, lived off the books. At the time, it was for compliance reasons. But when Garrett's team tried to purge internal audit trails, they hadn't known the shadow backup existed. I accessed it, and what I found changed everything. There was a file Garrett never meant for anyone to see. Codename Canvas. At first, it looked like a branding document for the NovaTrace merger. But buried inside were subfolders, private surveillance blueprints, not just algorithms for user behavior modeling, but staff-level predictive profiling. Canvas tracked employee data inputs, keystrokes, Slack messages, badge entries, then ranked employees by predictive loyalty risk. He had built a program to spy on his own staff. I pulled the logs. Garrett had flagged 7 employees for soft removal. 3 had already been fired during restructuring. And 1, Jess Grady. She was next on the list. Jess had been my former assistant. Smart, dedicated. The kind of worker who double-checked your calendar before you did. We hadn't spoken since my termination. I assumed she'd abandoned me. But maybe she was silenced too. I reached out anonymously, told her I had something that could save her job and expose what really happened. She agreed to meet. We met in a small cafe in River North. She was nervous, wore a scarf and sunglasses, didn't take them off the entire conversation. "I should have warned you," she whispered. "I knew what Garrett was doing. I needed the paycheck, and I thought, if I stayed quiet." She trailed off. I slid the Canvas file across the table. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through it. "I'm on the list," she said softly. "You were number 4, I replied. Tears filled her eyes. "He said if I kept my head down, I'd be safe. You were never safe." She exhaled. "What do you need from me?" "Testify. Give the internal audit team a sworn statement. Back me up on what you saw." She nodded slowly. That night, she emailed the board. By morning, everything shifted. The audit committee officially reopened Garrett's files. External auditors were brought in. The media pivoted. A new article dropped. Canvas, the secret surveillance program that got a CEO fired. Garrett tried to go on the offensive. He released a video statement. This is nothing more than a coordinated character assassination by a disgruntled stakeholder. But then came the footage. A former engineer leaked video logs of Canvas training sessions, led by Garrett himself. The board reconvened. A second vote was called, not just to suspend his compensation package, but to ban him permanently from all Westbridge holdings. It passed unanimously. But even as Garrett crumbled publicly, I felt something darker creeping from within the company itself. Philip Hawthorne, the same board chair who welcomed me back, began delaying decisions, dodging ethics reforms, avoiding restructuring proposals I'd submitted. Then I found out why. Garrett hadn't acted alone. Philip had known about Canvas. He'd approved the initial beta test for Investor Insight, and he'd buried the memo trail with Garrett. Confronted him after the vote. "You're not clean," I said, eyes steady. "You're just better at hiding." His face didn't even twitch. "You were useful, Sienna," he said calmly. "You still can be. But if you push this further, the system will protect itself, and no one protects you." I realized then, removing Garrett was just stage one. The rot ran deeper. The board, the legal team, the remaining architects of the original system, they'd all built careers by cutting corners, manipulating narratives, rewarding silence, and now I had to decide, expose everything, even if it meant tearing Westbridge apart, or walk away with my shares intact, legacy preserved, and my personal war won. That night, Maya asked me, "What are you going to do?" I stared at my laptop, at the encrypted folder labeled Root Files. It contained everything, Philip's name, the timelines, every version of Canvas, every ignored compliance memo, every cover-up, and I whispered, "I think it's time the system felt what it's like to be erased." The truth didn't set me free. It lit a fuse. For weeks, I'd believed Garrett Reese was the infection, the one who needed to be removed. But I was wrong. He was a symptom. The real sickness? The boardroom's quiet approval. The buried documents. The nods and winks and sealed bonus envelopes that kept bad men in power and good people out. Philip Hawthorne didn't build Westbridge's future. He built its firewall. And now I had the passwords to burn it down. I spent 5 days preparing. I didn't sleep much. I went through every file, every deleted Slack message I had recovered from the backup servers. I printed documents, recorded timestamps, logged employee removals. The Canvas files were just the tip. There were deeper programs, ones that never made it past code names. Greyhound was an attempt to predict political opinions through typing patterns. Spineless ranked staff compliance during mass layoffs. All funded under Employee Efficiency Optimization. Philip had approved every single one. And now he was distancing himself, rewriting minutes, scheduling closed-door meetings, calling in favors from board members who owed him decades of loyalty. He thought I was bluffing. He thought I wouldn't risk my 10%. But my shares were never the point. They were the entry ticket. The weapon was the truth. The emergency shareholder assembly was set for Friday. Philip had no idea I'd triggered it. In my capacity as a 10% owner, I filed an executive misconduct motion with the Compliance Committee, citing financial misrepresentation, ethical breaches, and conspiracy to conceal surveillance activities. Once filed, the company was legally obligated to assemble the stakeholders within 72 hours. I didn't announce I was the source. I let him sweat. At 9 a.m., the room filled. All 15 voting members of the private shareholder class were present. Philip wore his usual polished navy blue suit, calm as a poker player with a full hand, until I stood. "I'd like to present a motion to remove Philip Hawthorne as board chair and permanently bar him from serving in any leadership capacity, effective immediately," I said. He scoffed. "On what basis?" I opened my case folder. "I'll begin with the Greyhound files, and then I walked them through it all, the programs, the hidden funding trails, The illegal data analysis techniques, the backroom approvals, the intimidation of staff, the concealment of whistleblower reports. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I presented. Each sentence landed like a stone through glass. The room turned against him in real time. One shareholder interrupted me midway. "Mr. Hawthorne, did you know about any of this?" He swallowed. "We test a variety of models for operational efficiency." "So, that's a yes," I said, calm as ice. "Efficiency," I repeated, holding up a slide, "doesn't include surveilling employee anxiety levels through biometric keystroke patterns." The board voted 11 in favor, 2 abstained. 2 walked out before it was over. Philip didn't argue. He knew it was done. When security escorted him out, he passed me without speaking. But I knew that look. It was the look Garrett had worn when the mask came off and all that was left was fear. By that night, Westbridge's stock dipped 14%. Some investors panicked, but the press exploded. CEO removed. Now chairman falls. The woman who keeps bringing down Westbridge's power players. Secret surveillance programs at major tech firm exposed. Whistleblower moves to clean house. News crews camped outside my apartment. Strangers emailed me resumes. A late-night talk show host compared me to a boardroom assassin in heels. And then came the real offer, a buyout, $8.6 million for my 10%, from a rival firm, no strings, full exit, leave quietly, walk rich. Maya read the offer aloud. "You're officially dangerous," she said, pouring me tea. "So what's it going to be? Cash out or finish it?" I stared at the letter. The money would change everything. No more long nights, no more war. But something inside me whispered, not yet. Because Garrett's damage had one last legacy. Her name was Dana Walters, a junior systems analyst who was fired quietly 3 months before me. No warning, no severance, just an NDA and a signed settlement. She reached out to me after the shareholder meeting. Her message was one line. "I built the prototype for Spineless. I didn't know what it was until I read your report." We met. The next day. Dana was barely 24, brilliant and shaking when she told me what Garrett had done. He'd tricked her into coding predictive logic for team compliance scoring. When she questioned it, she was terminated for hostile workplace behavior. I asked her to testify. She agreed, on one condition. Make it permanent. No more programs. No more silence. And that's when I decided I wouldn't walk away. I'd rebuild the company I helped save. The next board meeting was different. All eyes were on me. This time, I didn't ask for permission. I submitted a resolution. The Ethical Oversight Directive. A full policy overhaul, independent internal auditing, whistleblower protection, immediate shutdown of Canvas, Greyhound, Spineless, and all related programs. Transparency reforms for future leadership. The room went silent after I presented it. Then one board member said, "You understand this will slash profits next quarter." I nodded. "Then maybe it's time we stopped chasing the wrong kind of profit." The vote passed 9-5. The room didn't cheer, but it shifted. A new direction, real this time. That night, I went home and stared at my reflection. I wasn't the same woman who got fired weeks ago. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't just the 10%. I was the reminder they never saw coming. For the first time in months, Westbridge was quiet, not silent, but steady. Garrett was gone. Philip was gone. The toxic programs had been decommissioned. Investigations were ongoing, audits were in motion, and the media attention had started to die down. But the building still held ghosts, and I wasn't finished. The board offered me the permanent CEO position. Twice. Once with full control, once with a multi-year golden contract. I turned them both down, because I didn't want a title that needed repairing. I wanted a system that didn't need revenge to function. Instead, I accepted a smaller seat, head of strategic integrity. A department. I invented one that had never existed before, because no one thought it needed to. Now it did. My first move was creating an internal truth platform, the Vault. It allowed employees to report issues anonymously, with encrypted protections and mandatory third-party review. Not just whistleblowing, but early warnings, misconduct, discrimination, harassment, things that used to die in HR inboxes or disappear in performance reviews. The Vault couldn't fix everything, but it could protect the next version of me. The tech world called it revolutionary. Others called it idealistic. I didn't care what they called it, only that it worked. But even as I tried to restore the structure, there was still one piece left broken: myself. Because when you go to war with the people you trusted, something inside you doesn't just break, it recalibrates. You don't hear laughter the same. You don't accept apologies the same. You don't trust easy. Even when people mean well, some scars don't scream. They whisper, and they whisper even louder when the building goes quiet. I started seeing a therapist again, not because I couldn't handle the noise, but because I finally could, and that scared me more than the silence ever did. I talked about the power, the manipulation, the loneliness of being right too early, and how justice doesn't taste sweet when it's earned through ash. One evening, months after the last scandal faded, I received a package. No label, no note. Inside, a flash drive. I stared at it for hours before plugging it in. Encrypted files, one folder, labeled Ashes. Inside were documents, new ones, related to NovaTrace, but not from Garrett's archives. These were darker, older, files on military-grade behavioral systems, data procurement for overseas partners, and a single email from a familiar name, Jonah Rusk, the man behind Garrett's rise. Quiet, wealthy, ghost-like. I thought he'd disappeared. He hadn't. He'd just changed clothes. Now he was behind a new shell company, Augur Dynamics, and it was bidding to buy what remained of NovaTrace's assets post-collapse. The story wasn't over. It had just shifted zip codes. I called Layla. "I need the shareholder registry," I said, "for the outside vendors circling us." She didn't even ask why. She just sent it. Inside, I found his signature, Jonah's, disguised under a shell LLC based in Luxembourg. Same patterns, same game, different mask. I sat on my balcony that night, holding the files. The wind was sharp. The city was louder than usual, and I thought about walking away. Finally, leaving the war to someone else. Letting Westbridge become clean and quiet while I slipped into peace. Then I remembered Dana, Jess, the interns who stopped me in the hallway with quiet thanks, the custodian who left a sticky note on my door that read, "You changed everything." For us. And I knew what came next. The next morning, I went to work and called an emergency board meeting. Jonah Rusk is attempting to enter our acquisition pipeline through a dummy firm, I said. I have the documents. If we let him in, we become what we just fought to destroy. One board member asked, "Do you have proof?" I held up the flash drive. "I have receipts." The board moved to blacklist all shell firms associated with Augur Dynamics and related entities. The motion passed 12-0. Another fire stopped. Another predator closed out. But this time, the celebration didn't come. Because this time, the board knew the price. Weeks later, I received a message on my personal email. No sender, just a line of text. "You win this round. But the market forgets quickly. You'll burn out before we do." I didn't respond. I just archived the message and wrote one line in my journal. "Let them build empires on sand. I plant roots." That spring, Westbridge, released its first company-wide transparency report, anonymous testimonials, data ethics updates, live tracking of reform milestones. My name wasn't on the cover. It didn't need to be. Because I wasn't interested in fame. I was interested in making sure no woman, no worker, no voice was ever dismissed like I was. That was the legacy I built. Not in headlines, not in speeches, but in fireproof code, in protected spaces, in the silence that follows justice. On the anniversary of my firing, I returned to the boardroom, same seat, same view, different company, and I left a letter inside the drawer before I walked out. It read, "To the next person who sits here, if they try to erase you, don't fight back loud, fight back smart. And never forget, you don't need permission to reclaim what's yours. You just need to be ready when the doors swing open." Sienna Blake.